I'll try. But so probably you'll find that I speak quickly, and we'll see if this thing works. No. It's just too
Oh, there you go.
So I think that there's this big conversation around the world about reforming education, and that it can't wait. It's this urgent thing that's happening, and it's really quite a global thing. And the PISA scores and all that stuff is driving some of that conversation. But really, my question is, what's wrong with what we're currently doing, and what needs to change? What is it about our current system that's not working, and who's driving those agendas, and are they the right agendas, and which ones are we subscribing to as a school? All of that stuff, I think, is important for us. As educators, the world around us is changing. We know our job as teachers is changing. A lot of it driven by technology, but some other stuff as well, which I will get into. So that's the nature of our talk. I'm going to start with this provocative little video, which maybe some of you have seen. I'm going to start with this provocative little video. It's very provocative.
We don't need to change anything.
So rolling with punches, this is it.
The U.S. Department of Commerce ranked 55 industry sectors by their level of IT intensiveness. Education was ranked number 55, the lowest, below coal mining.
For the last 100 years, we've used the industrial narrative. Schools are like factories. It's an administrative process. It's about control and order.
The kids are having a much more stimulating and rich environment outside of schools than they are in school.
Kids are very rich content developers today through their social networking sites. They're big communicators through email, instant messaging, and text messaging, and yet all of those things are banned from their schools.
If you turn off the device, it's potentially a turn off child.
We have to accept as educators that technology is not really a choice. It has created a world. It's just not here to help you teach traditional subjects. It has invented, has emerged a completely new environment.
It's about relationship. It's about community. It's about connectivity. It's about access.
Children are living now in a different space. They're living in what I call nearly now. And nearly now is that space that they text in, the space that they upload their Facebook entries in, the space that they Twitter in, the space that is not quite synchronous. Now, it's a really interesting space because it's not adversarial, it's not pressured. It's a space where people can, it's all the R words, they can reflect and retract and research and repeat. It's a very gentle word. I tell you what, it's a great world for learning.
If I could bring my own classroom in today, I'm not sure it would be a bricks and mortar classroom.
So the student is at the center, and school is just one of the ways and places that they learn. But they also learn through communities, at home, in museums, in libraries, and of course, online. It's about providing the best quality teachers no matter where a student lives and making those bridges.
It's wandering around the city with their cell phones and collecting data that kids will be doing outside of school.
School might be the place where you come together to do joint projects, where you social network, where you do some of the other kinds of enrichment things.
We've got a classroom system when we could have a community system. It's about opening the door to NASA resources, to the labs that are being developed online at MIT, and connecting these students to the kinds of opportunities that will fundamentally shift their academic experience and make them better prepared not only for college, but for life.
You start with the teacher. If I want my students to be making global connections, then I'm going to give the tools to my teachers first and provide them with opportunities to connect with other teachers around the world or other teachers around the country.
The task here is to give teachers a place where they can swap authentic ingredients and their evidence that those ingredients are safe and tested. Do you know that doesn't exist anywhere in the world? I've just been part of a big project that I think is going to change that and change that radically.
We have to develop a narrative that sustains 21st century learning.
If we simply apply standards, if we simply have a steady regime of standardized testing, that will make things better. When in fact, it is economically actually a foolish idea, because the jobs that these kids in school will be having do not call for these kind of right answer vending machine approach.
Life no child that can fade away. It enables local creativity and innovations.
They will be doing work that calls on their artistic abilities, that calls on their abilities of synthesis, that calls on their abilities of understanding context, that calls on their abilities of working with teams, that calls on their abilities in some sense to be multidisciplinary, multilingual, multicultural.
So the coin of the realm is not memorizing the facts that they're going to need to know for the rest of their lives. The coin of the realm will be, do you know how to find information? Do you know how to validate it? Do you know how to synthesize it? Do you know how to leverage it? Do you know how to communicate it? Do you know how to collaborate with it? Do you know how to problem solve with it? That's the new 21st century set of literacies. And it looks a lot different than the model that most of us were raised under.
Now we're looking at a whole different range of schools. We're looking at schools that are producing genius, collaborative, gregarious, brave children who care about stuff like their culture. And to build schools that do that is a whole other challenge. And around the world, people are testing out the ingredients of what makes that work. And those ingredients are being assembled into some just stunning recipes in different places. It's a very exciting type of learning. It's the death of education, but it's the dawn of learning. That makes me very happy.
So I think the video is meant to be a provocative video, and it's meant to just point out that narrative of change that we're being pushed towards. And it's coming from everywhere. And I think that educators sometimes believe that we are immune to that. But I think, though, that we might find ourselves in a similar place that Detroit auto workers found themselves in the 80s. And I do think that there are things that can challenge the institution of school that we're not really paying attention to. I'll point to an obvious one, I think, which is Pomoja, which is now training DP students. It may not be the most successful environment currently. It's only 4 years old. But the Pomoja has doubled in size. It's now 4 times the size of our school. It's a big program, and it will just continue to get bigger, and it's totally online. So I think that all I'm saying is that change is happening around us, and either we pay attention to it and be involved in it, or we'll be swept by it to something different, or something that we may not want. Even the session that we're doing in Vienna is about transformation. It's about transforming the expectations that we're doing it. And anytime anybody ever talks about change in schools, somebody always puts up a slide from 1937 to show what classes looked like in 1937 as a comparison. But we know it's different now because we know the kids are in color, and I think that's an important change. Other than that, I'm not so sure. And then when you add technology to the mix, it really, this slide doesn't move. What happens? So when you add technology to the mix, it just looks like that for the most part, which really is not very different. It's not transformative, and I think that we put a lot of faith that technology is going to drive the change or drive improvement, and it doesn't. It doesn't at all. In fact, technology often leads to decreased success for students in most situations that we need to be aware of. I guess I should stand back here. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to flip them for you? Me to do it? If you just kind of give me a knowing look.
Thanks. A knowing look. So this is the narrative that we're living with, that we're going to use technology and it's going to change things and kids are going to be better learners. But maybe you've already noticed in your classrooms that it hasn't really improved the learning. Maybe the students are a little bit more engaged, maybe they're not. But to actually say it's making them smarter or better students, I think that we would all say not. That's all good.
I'll sit back here and do it.
Oh wait, I was just doing the wrong.
Hey, that's good. That's
Okay.
good. So this is the School of One. I don't know if you know the School of One. It's a New York school. There were like 5 schools that attempted this. It's a math program, and it's parallel to the day-to-day life that students do. And they come into this math program, and there's a big screen that says, John Darcy, go to room 212 today because you're going to work with 6 other kids on this math problem because we know you got a problem with this math problem. And it's going to say, Mary, you're going to go work on this mathletics thing or this Khan Academy thing. And it's going to say, Bob, you're going to go see a teacher. And every single day, this stuff is gathering all this data about each child and then feeding it back and providing the child with the next learning experience that he or she is going to be successful with their learning. It's very standards driven, it's like Common Core, and that moves the thing on. It's like really clear measurables. It's $1 million so far to implement it in each school. Of the 5 schools that have done it, 2 schools have found minimal learning gains, 1 school found no learning gains, and 2 schools actually had a decline in test scores. with all that technology, $1 million per school, and it didn't work. Please. So that's just what that looks like. I believe that a big problem there is that it's still a model that drives a curriculum agenda that is irrelevant to the students. That it's still it's a standards thing that they're saying you have to do this, and I don't think doesn't matter how you feed that, it's not necessarily going to drive learning. And one click, I think, will start this little video.
It's an entirely new cultural proposition, I think, and it changes the game. And my argument is that one of the reasons we have to transform education, and we already do, is because the technologies have changed the whole context of education, but they're also among the ways in which the transformation itself will take place. So this shift to me is much more than a shift in the way we do art or the way we do design, although that's certainly the case. These tools are extraordinary now. They affect the way we think in all disciplines. They affect the way we think of disciplines. They affect the way disciplines interact. So these new tools seem to me to be providing opportunities and a palette of possibilities which should be available to every single student, not just to a few.
So you all know Ken Robinson, right? He's really that whole thing that schools have killed creativity. I suspect you've seen his TED Talk. It's the #1 TED Talk ever presented. I think that conversation, he mentioned a couple things there. And one was meeting the needs of every single learner. I think that's the goal. That's the next thing, that what we can do is meet the needs of every child in our building. Quite frankly, I would think every person in the building. I don't think schools, as we transform them, will be places where adults teach children. I think institutions of education will be a place where we all come to be learners, primarily. First and foremost, we're learners. John Hattie did his massive meta-analysis of his research, and it's quite powerful and has a big impact on a lot of academic research. They said that one of the #1 things that empowers students to become better learners is if they become self-learners, if they themselves become the teachers. If they are driving their own education, they will be more successful. So, there's been 100 years of technology, and it has none. It's really flatlined learning. Nowhere has it been successful, even though we've tried it many, many, many times.
That's a good question, though.
Sure.
Or is this not the moment? I mean, how are you defining technology? Because one could say that, pen and paper is technology, right? I mean, so are you looking at like digital, electronic?
Yeah, digital.
Kind of, okay.
So I'm going to, yes, digital. Things that plug in for the most part.
Things that plug in, okay.
So John Hattie, I just mentioned him, he identified in his research that 76% of schools that use technology get 0 learning gains, or very minimal. Huge study. All sorts of schools across the world, 76% get very little learning gains. It's a lot of money, a lot of your time, an awful lot of energy for very, very little value. And I would wonder at our school whether after a couple of years that we've been using technology intensively, whether we would be part of this group. I don't know, maybe we are, I don't know. And one more click.
An ideal way to study a film and prepare to use it with your class is to preview it, with pencil in hand, taking notes as the film progresses.
The eye of the motion picture projector cuts through the barrier of distance to let students observe people and places half a world away, to witness the drama while they consider the problems of our times. And finally, students can see through the use of classroom films what they need to understand as they develop their skills for the future. The lens of a motion picture projector is an eye. It can help you stimulate, motivate, educate your students. But like any eye, it must be pointed in the right direction. Its wise use demands selectivity. Behind the eye, there must be a brain, your brain, making the selection, choosing the perspective that serves your goals.
I think that was brilliant. I love that he uses all the same language I do in making presentations about motivation and all of that kind of stuff. And he talked about brains, and that was brilliant. I don't know, I think I must have trimmed that down a little bit, Because there was a scene where the teacher was sitting beside the projector. Did you
That was in front.
It was the beginning, and I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a student actually running the projector because the technology was too complex for the teacher to handle. I thought that was pretty interesting too. So whether it's projectors or radio before that, all of that technology, computers in the early 1980s, early 70s, sorry, with Papert, they talked about all of these things were going to dramatically revolutionize education, and none of it has. Even with our one-to-one, like it hasn't changed a lot. Anything, it hasn't changed a lot of what we do. So one more slide, or one more click. But the question then is, what's happening in those 24% of schools? Why are they getting learning gains? That's the big question, right? What's happening there, Patricia? So in schools where they were experiencing learning gains with technology initiatives, there are 5 things that kind of drove that. And so students were exposed to diverse pedagogies. You can just kind of click 5 times. Yeah. Multiple opportunities to learn. Students controlled their learning. You can read them. It'd be silly for me to continue doing that.
Is there 5?
There is one more.
Oh.
I think they're critical to kind of begin to get our heads around what are the implications of these. What are the implications of students actually controlling their learning? Or what are the implications of having focused 10 hours of PD just around technology? In order to get any learning gains with technology, 10 hours of continuous focused PD just on use of technology. So there, you can hit all of these. So a lot of, maybe it's just one.
Yeah.
So a lot of the research is suggesting that the learning gains happen when there's convergence of multiple factors. If you put technology into a school alone, you get nothing. If you spend time just talking about learner-centered pedagogies, you're not going to transform anything. If you do any one of these alone, you won't get them. These researchers, theorists, educational leaders, have talked about different numbers of convergences, some as many as 9, some as few as 3, but generally across the literature, in the experience of educators, these 5 seem to be there. They seem to be the necessary converging points. If I could talk to you about each of these for about 2 hours, I suspect, but clearly you may not want to hear that, and we don't have that much time. But I will talk about the educational neuroscience, which I think is a pivotal one in this. Thanks, Patricia.
Oh, was that a...
Yeah, it was like we were chanting each other there.
I'm like, yeah,
So,
completely
it's
engaged.
okay. And one more.
Oh.
So I think I may have shown you this slide when I spoke to you as a whole staff. And one more. I assume you read that. I hope you did. But
Oh,
feel free to
wait,
read
what?
this one. No, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. So the thing that neuroscience is doing is it's helping us get the facts around how brains gather and retain knowledge and create understanding. Most neuroscientists who are deeply involved in the field would say you cannot take anything out of neuroscience and then transfer it into a classroom and say this is the reality, because it's a very new domain. However, when you align the thinking that's coming out of the neurosciences with the other things we know to be true about teaching and learning, then I think you can start to make connections. So in Fisher's point, one of his big things is that brains gather data. So if we're all in this room and we're all about to learn something, we all come into the learning with our own history. We've built our own knowledge around all sorts of different things. This is then how you as an educator are challenged to then teach something new about, in this case, US policy, or the connection between US policy and this president's use of US policy. So it could be built on someone's understanding of games, or they have a very socially active family, or it's involved about some movies they've watched. But people have come to this point with all sorts of different preconceived understandings and knowledge. And that's why we do formative assessment. That's why we do diagnostic assessment, because if you're trying to build new knowledge onto different backgrounds, that knowledge is not going to be built maybe at all. Certainly, it won't have the same effect that you intend for every single learner, because all of our brains handle that differently. It's critical that we do that formative assessment piece, that we understand what they know before we try to build new knowledge on. And that's from our neuroscientists. And that is nothing really new. Like, we've known that from our educational psychologists. We've known that for 200 years, when Horace Mann was really just beginning to deal with public education in the US, and he was saying, we need to have it personalized. It needs to deal with every single kid differently. We just haven't done it. But now we have the neuroscience to show it. This is that thing where we all stood up and we did the hand thing. Do you remember that? So I'm not going to make you do it, but I'll talk us through it, just because this is what I will do. So Patricia, if you can keep clicking buttons. Sure, so there's the higher order thinking stuff that's happening in the higher order part of our brain. And then there's the corpus callosum that connects our two brains with our thumbs, and the stronger that is, the more communication is going back and forth, and we like that because it's good for our left and right brains that really work well together. I think this next connection, and one more, Patricia, that the hippocampus, which is so involved with memory, it's critically involved with memory. You're not going to remember things unless this part of your brain is, and it's the core part of your brain. You can't just think about teaching kids up here. It has to be here if the memory is going to connect to it. And these two, the research is showing that the amygdala and the hippocampus work together. So this whole idea of emotional connection or aggression or fear, all of that stuff is connected to memory. If a child is anxious coming into your area, your subject, your whatever, they're not going to learn stuff. If they're going into a test and they're full of anxiety, they're probably not going to perform well. It's no, just because they do poorly in the test doesn't mean they don't get it. It just may be down here. And this part of the brain, this medulla oblongata part down here, is all about the fight and flight. So again, if kids are coming into a learning space where they're not comfortable, they will run. And you can, and again, Patricia, you can click. So these slides, which you may remember as well, are just talking about different parts of the brain. And so this part of the brain is a very specific part, and it remembers faces. If you have a bicycle accident and you hit this part of your brain, you may not recognize your sibling, your mother, your father coming into your hospital room until that part of the brain figures it out again. Or another part of your brain learns it. It's very specific to here. Patricia? And one more, please. So one part of your brain is remembering faces, and you're going to remember this face better than this face because this face is smiling. That's the only reason, but you'll remember this face better. And you remember the names in a different part of your brain. That's really important because the challenge then for educators is to begin to make those connections for kids. If you're remembering some bit of knowledge that you're teaching, and it's stored in one part of the brain, and something else is stored in another part, the task is to build those connections. The first time you meet someone with a face and a name, you kind of go, 3 minutes later, it's like, shit, what was that person's name? I can't remember, right? And that kind of stuff. So you meet the person again and again and again, and those neural pathways get stronger and stronger. Those connections you're making around literature, language, anything, mathematics, you're building those connections. And it's repetitive. You have to do it again and again. And the quality of that repetitive work is critically important. So all of that neuroscience stuff is playing into this. And if we're not paying attention to it, I think, those converging areas, we're missing a big part of what it is to be an educator. Thanks, Patricia. These can be a meter long, these axons that connect our neurons. And we talked about the myelin that wraps. And the faster, the better that connection is, the better your memory, your recall, your application of knowledge, your deeper understanding. All of that stuff will be better if you're making these connections stronger. And that's just a scaffold from Hong Kong, which I thought was interesting. So the big idea, one of the big takeaway, is that every brain is different and every learner learns differently. And unless our systems begin to address that, we will never, ever, ever meet the needs of the learners that we have in our school. And in our school, we make a claim in our mission statement to meet the needs of every learner. That's our drive. It's not the IB. Our mission as a community is to meet the needs of every learner. And are we? And if we're not, why not? And if we can, why aren't we trying? I mentioned Horace Mann a few slides ago. They made a stamp at this guy because he really was a leader in education. But back in 1820, he was saying that every schools need to be personalized. They need to meet the needs of every learner. He didn't win. John Dewey also, you may know him, he's an American educational theorist. He was a progressivist. He was a new learning guy. He was all experiential learning. He was very critical into thinking about that we need to create schools that address the individual learning needs of children. And they need to be involved in real-world, authentic experiences in order for learning to be anchored into their memories. And unless you're getting there, you're not meeting the needs of the learners in your space. He also said that it's harder. That system is harder than the traditional model. And in 1930, he gave that he was predicting what was going to come next. He said, this is the reason why these systems may not work, is because they're harder. And people don't think that they're harder. They think, we can just personalize it. We can transfer responsibility to the students somehow, and they will then own it. But that's not the case. It's a harder model because it's more involved because we're meeting the needs of every single learner. And how do you do that? So we're looking at transforming education. Yes. And the thing is, so why now? John Dewey said in 1938 it wasn't possible. I showed you Hattie's work that technology is not making any difference. So why am I standing up here? Because I'm going to tell you that this is the way we want to go. But why now? And it's about the convergence. It's about these things that have never been available to people prior to now. Just not available. they didn't have the resources that we have. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the access to neuroscience. They didn't have the cognitive psychology that we have. We understand better now how people learn than we've ever had in the past. We have access to the most personalized adaptive technologies mobile students are using to learn. I had a colleague in my office yesterday saying that her niece in Michigan, who's going into grade 11, who's a top flying student, a straight A student, is dropping out of school. She's going to homeschool herself next year. So this child's going off to university. She knows how to get there. And she knows that the narrative that we sell, that the only way to get to a good university is through our programs, through the testing of our she knows it's not true. She's finding a different route. And I think that that's the kind of thing that's going to happen more and more, that families and kids are going to find better strategies than what we give them in our schools. And that's the thing that's going to make us change. So with those 5 convergences, the question is not why should schools transform? The question is, what does it look different? Because all these people are saying we need to transform schools, but so what? What does that look like? And I've been struggling with that for years, to be honest with you. So what is the, wow, we skipped like so many slides there. So I've been struggling with that, so what does it look like? And I was let off that hook by Stephen Heppel, who was one of those guys talking in that previous slide. He said there isn't one answer. There are as many models. I can go back and kind of move us back to the right slide. Yeah, are we there? There's not one answer. The truth is that different communities will find different answers, and that's the beauty of what's happening with technology and our spaces. That in England now they've got these super classes of 60 kids. All the stuff we've learned up to now is like 60 kids. That's ridiculous. How can you possibly have 60 kids in a classroom? But they're having success with those because their support structures around them are good. Because they're putting 4 teachers with those 60 kids. So now you can do all sorts of differentiation stuff within that group of 60 kids. You're not stuck with the 15 you might have in a classroom who may or may not have done homework that night. So this isn't just me. This, being Canadian though, I want to point out that Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario all have personalized learning legislation and policies in place. They're driving this agenda in Canada. And Canada, just for the sake, even though I do not subscribe to the PISA scores, which I think are a wrong way to think about learning, Canada does score very high in those. And this is, we are doing these things. And so what are other PISA countries doing? So New Zealand, Finland, and Sweden are also looking at personalized learning and how they can make sure they're meeting the needs of every single learner in their classrooms. But what about that crazy place called the United States or all over the map? What are they doing? All of these states are looking at personalized learning. And most of them are being driven by the massive amount of money they're putting into technology. It's shaking things up. It's disrupting classes. It's disrupting what we're doing as educators. I don't think it's right. I hate that the technology is driving it. I think it should be about meeting the needs of every learner. That's what should be driving it. I'll take it as it comes. You've seen this, but I'm going to show it to you again. Because teaching is hard.
Oh, wait.
So in this time of change, when I'm saying to you, everything is going to change. The whole structure is going to change of education. It's going to be, we're going to be here where this little girl is. And it's going to feel like this. But I don't think we can avoid it.
Here goes something, I guess. Do this. I'm gonna jump. Oh, my feet slipping off. No snow house. Okay. Straight. Do you go faster on the end run? A little bit. Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much. Just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all. A bigger 20. I got it. Okay. Here. Go.
argument is that we're all at the top of that slope at this point, and we can either choose to go down it or we can choose to resist it. But I would say that the world would be a better place if we choose to go down the hill. I think that we missed a couple of slides.
Okay.
But I won't, I'm just going to be troublesome. And I'm going to go to this one. I'm sorry to kind of go back to it, but I think it's really important. We have to manage the places within which we work, and it's true. There's no blame or there's no accusations. There's no animosity here. But the reality is that the structures within we work are significant barriers to this. So long as we have to put teachers in a classroom with a specific number of kids that move through a cycle that it may be totally irrelevant to those children and the teacher, it's not going to work. The schedules that we create, the calendars that we create, the way we organize the human beings in school are a significant barrier to achieving personalized learning. There are many examples around the world where people are using different models of organizing human beings in schools, and I think we'd be wise to begin to explore those. I think, Patricia, there's 2 more slides that I want, because I think that these things get in the way of all the other things that we really like to talk about and that we believe to be true. Patricia, you can click, because it's going to be a list of stuff. I think that the schedules, every time we talk about these things, someone says, yeah, but time. Yeah, but time. Yeah, but I got this, I got this, I gotta go. I don't have time during the day because the schedule, I've got to go teach. I've got to have a meeting, I've got to have these things that I'm not in control of. And so long as that conversation drives conversations about how we are working together to create curriculum, or how we're working together to meet the needs of that child, I think that's a problem. Patricia, I got another 7 things here. I think that the schedules become a barrier too. I think authentic time with learners. So some teacher sitting with me saying, John, you will improve your math ability if we do this and this with you, or a group of us at a time that's relevant to us, not when a time relevant to the bells and schedules. That's when learning happens. We tried many times to launch our peer mentoring and support thing within our community. You know that if you've been here for a couple of years. And the hardest part about doing that was simply time to get into each other's classrooms. And it's that schedule. Really, it's as black and white. There's no mystery to it. It's the schedule. I'm not saying that these are true. These are possibilities. But I definitely believe that this is the word that you will begin to see more and more as you read about it, as you pay attention to the world. Because personalized learning is happening in so many places, in so many different schools. I think I'm probably done. I can keep talking if you want. So what I'm going to ask you to do, on the back of this is a rubric. And so we can have some time where you can actually engage with this content. But I'm going to present this at CISA on the weekend. And if you could give me feedback, then rip it in half, and then use the other one for your next session. Awesome.
You
don't have one of those? Figure that out. I have more.
Yeah, we're on. Maybe you're from the bottom. No, I read the top.
Yes.
So you read the bottom.